My name is Hazel, I'm 28 years old, and I'm standing at my father's 65th birthday party watching him destroy me in front of 200 guests. You're a disappointment, a failure who plays with flour while your siblings build empires. The country club's crystal chandeliers seem to mock me as Dad's voice echoes through the ballroom. You'll never amount to anything. I feel every eye on me, waiting for tears that won't come. Instead, I smile and say, "Thank you for the motivation, Dad." Then I walk out, leaving behind my childhood need for his approval. Before I continue this story, let me ask, where are you watching from today? If you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I turned my father's cruelty into my greatest success. Trust me, this journey from rejection to redemption will show you that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. So settle in, because what happened next changed everything. Growing up as the middle child in the prestigious Hamilton family meant living in the shadow of perfection. My older brother Thomas graduated from Harvard Law at 24, while my younger sister Claire became the youngest cardiac surgeon in the state. Meanwhile, I was Hazel, the girl who spent hours in the kitchen creating what my father called meaningless pastries. Harold Hamilton built his real estate empire from nothing, turning a small property management company into a multi-million-dollar corporation that controlled half the commercial buildings in our city. He expected his children to be extensions of his ambition, pieces on his chessboard moving toward greater wealth and prestige. My mother Diane played her role perfectly, the society wife who hosted charity galas and smiled through her husband's casual cruelty. She had a gift for rewriting reality, turning Harold's harsh words into tough love, and his neglect into teaching independence. When I was 12 and won a junior baking competition, she patted my head and said, "That's nice, dear, but don't let hobbies distract from real achievements." The trophy went into the basement, along with all my other childish pursuits that didn't align with the Hamilton legacy. Thomas tried to protect me in his own way, sneaking into my room after Father's lectures to share candy bars and remind me that not everything in life had to be about profit margins. But even he couldn't hide his relief at being the golden son, the one who made Father's eyes light up when discussing merger strategies and market acquisitions. Claire, brilliant and cold even as a teenager, learned early that emotion was weakness in the Hamilton household. She performed her role of perfect daughter with surgical precision, never understanding why I couldn't just conform and make everyone's life easier. College became my first battlefield for independence. Harold enrolled me in the prestigious Whitmore Business School without asking, already planning which division of Hamilton Enterprises I'd manage after graduation. But I had other plans. Using the money from tutoring other students, I secretly enrolled in culinary classes at the community college across town. For 3 years, I lived a double life, attending board meeting simulations by day and learning the perfect temperature for chocolate tempering by night. My business professors praised my strategic thinking, never knowing I applied their lessons to recipe development and kitchen efficiency instead of corporate takeovers. The day I graduated from culinary school was supposed to be my triumph. I'd maintained a perfect GPA in both programs, proving I could excel at whatever I chose. I invited my family, hoping they'd finally see that my passion had merit, that success didn't have to look like Thomas's law firm or Claire's operating room. But the auditorium seats I'd reserved remained empty. Later, Mother called to say they'd been busy with important obligations, which turned out to be a golf tournament at the country club. That night, I found a note slipped under my apartment door from Thomas, "Proud of you, sis. Dad's wrong. Follow your dreams." It was the only acknowledgement I received. With $20,000 saved from years of part-time work and careful budgeting, I opened Sweet Dreams Bakery in a small storefront on Maple Street. The location wasn't prestigious, wedged between a laundromat and a used bookstore, but it was mine. I spent weeks painting the walls soft yellow, installing vintage display cases I'd found at estate sales, and perfecting recipes that would become customer favorites. The morning I hung my sign, Harold drove by in his Mercedes, slowing down just long enough for me to see him shake his head in disgust. Mother called later to say he was concerned about the family reputation and suggested I could still enroll in MBA programs if I came to my senses. The early days were brutal but beautiful. I'd wake at 3 in the morning to begin baking, the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls filling the small space. By 6, I'd flip the sign to "Open" and greet the handful of curious customers who'd wander in. Slowly, word spread about the bakery where everything was made from scratch, where the owner knew every regular's name and favorite order. Thomas would stop by after court, still in his expensive suits, buying boxes of pastries for his office and leaving tips that were larger than his purchases. Even Claire visited once, though she spent the entire time listing the health code violations she imagined existed and suggesting I'd be better off selling the space while I could minimize losses. What hurt most wasn't their lack of faith in my business acumen, but their inability to see the joy I'd found. Every perfectly risen soufflé, every customer's smile at their first bite of my signature chocolate tart, every wedding cake that became part of someone's happiest memory, these were my victories. But in the Hamilton family, victory was measured in stock portfolios and property acquisitions, not in the simple pleasure of creating something beautiful with your own hands. The chasm between my world and theirs grew wider with each passing day, setting the stage for the confrontations that would eventually shatter our family facade completely. The ultimatum came on a rainy Thursday morning, delivered with Harold's typical theatrical flair. He summoned me to his office at Hamilton Enterprises, a glass and steel monument to his success that towered over downtown. I sat across from his massive mahogany desk, feeling like a child again despite being 25 years old with my own business. "Hazel," he began, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointed authority, "this bakery nonsense has gone on long enough. You have two choices: join the family business where you belong, or be cut off completely. No more health insurance through the family plan, no more emergency funds, no more Hamilton name on your business documents. Choose wisely." I looked at him, this man who'd never attended a single school play or baking competition, who'd missed my high school graduation for a business trip to Tokyo, and felt oddly calm. "I choose my bakery," I said simply. His face turned an alarming shade of red, veins bulging at his temples as he slammed his hand on the desk. "You ungrateful little fool. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Thomas bills more in a month than your little shop makes in a year. Claire's research is saving lives while you're playing with cookie dough." But I'd made my decision long ago, the day I realized that his approval was a prize I'd kill myself trying to win and still never achieve. Mother's manipulation was subtler but no less cruel. She appeared at my apartment that evening with tears already streaming down her carefully made-up face. "How could you do this to me, Hazel? All I've ever wanted was a united family. Your father works so hard to provide opportunities, and you throw them back in his face. My heart can't take this stress. The doctor says my blood pressure is dangerously high because of all this family drama." She clutched her chest dramatically, a performance worthy of daytime television. When I didn't immediately cave, she shifted tactics. "Think of how this looks to our friends. Just yesterday, Miranda Ashworth asked why you weren't working at the company, and I had to make excuses. The embarrassment is killing me slowly." The family attacks began almost immediately. Cousin Janet, who'd always been Harold's favorite niece and worked as his personal assistant, started her campaign of subtle sabotage. She'd visit the bakery with groups of her society friends, loudly discussing how some people just can't accept their limitations, and wondering aloud how long before this little experiment failed. She took photos of every minor imperfection, a slightly lopsided cupcake here, a fingerprint on a display case there, and posted them on social media with captions about what happens when amateurs try to play business owner. Her followers, mostly other Hamilton Enterprises employees and family associates, piled on with comments about nepotism and failure. The first major blow came when I discovered Harold had been actively sabotaging my business relationships. Robert Chen, the city's most influential food critic, had scheduled a review of sweet dreams that could have transformed my small bakery into a destination. The morning of his visit, I received a curt cancellation email with no explanation. Weeks later, Thomas overheard Harold at the club bragging about how a generous donation to Chen's favorite charity had convinced him to focus his reviews on more established establishments. The lost opportunity stung, but the betrayal cut deeper. My own father was actively working to destroy my dreams. The supplier's situation escalated quickly from inconvenient to potentially devastating. Suddenly, my flour deliveries were delayed, my dairy orders were mysteriously cancelled, and the specialty chocolate I'd sourced from a small Belgian company became unavailable despite my standing order. One supplier, Johnson's Restaurant Supply, finally admitted the truth after I'd been a loyal customer for 2 years. "I'm sorry, Hazel, old mister," Johnson said, unable to meet my eyes. "Harold Hamilton holds the mortgage on my warehouse. He made it clear that doing business with you would have consequences. I've got grandkids to think about." The revelation that my father would threaten other small business owners just to hurt me showed a cruelty I hadn't imagined possible. Then came Derek. We'd been dating for 6 months, and I thought I'd finally found someone who understood my passion for baking and supported my independence. He was a software developer who worked crazy hours himself, and we'd bonded over late-night conversations about following our dreams despite family pressure. But one evening, he showed up at the bakery looking haunted. "I need to tell you something," he said, hands shaking as he pulled out his phone. He showed me screenshots of bank transfers, $50,000 deposited into his account from Hamilton Enterprises with a memo reading, "Consultation Services." Harold had paid him to leave me, to make it look like even relationships were impossible because of my career choice. "I didn't take it, Hazel. I sent it back immediately," Derek explained, "but the damage was done. How could I trust anyone when my father's money could reach into every corner of my life?" We tried to continue dating, but the poison of Harold's interference had seeped in. Every missed call, every cancelled date, I wondered if he'd been bought after all. We ended things 2 weeks later, another casualty of the Hamilton family war. I threw myself deeper into work, extending hours and developing new recipes as if success could somehow fill the growing void where family should have been. Aunt Martha emerged as an unexpected ally during this dark period. Harold's older sister had always been the family rebel, a successful artist who'd refused to join the family business decades ago. She appeared at my bakery one quiet afternoon, her silver hair styled in an elegant bob, wearing the kind of bohemian jewelry that made Harold roll his eyes at family gatherings. "I've been watching this unfold," she said, settling into a corner table with a cup of my lavender Earl Grey tea. "Harold did the same thing to me 30 years ago. But you're stronger than I was, Hazel. And I want to help." She slid a check across the table, enough to cover 3 months of operating expenses. "Consider it an investment in talent and courage." The health inspector's visit came 2 weeks after I'd politely declined another dinner invitation where Harold planned to talk sense into me. The inspector arrived during the morning rush, clipboard in hand and expression stern. He spent 3 hours examining every corner of my kitchen, testing temperatures, checking expiration dates, and photographing supposed violations. My workspace, always meticulously clean and organized, somehow failed to meet standards that other bakeries routinely passed. He cited issues that seemed manufactured, a thermometer reading that was allegedly 2 degrees off, a hairline crack in a tile that posed no actual health risk, a technicality about my hand-washing sign placement. The warning notice he left could have been devastating to my reputation if posted publicly. Thomas called that evening with inside information. "Dad's golf buddy sits on the health board," he explained, his voice heavy with disgust. "He basically ordered a harassment inspection. I've already contacted a lawyer friend who specializes in this kind of abuse of power. Don't worry, sis. I've got documentation that'll make this go away. But you need to be prepared. Dad's not going to stop." The knowledge that my brother was finally seeing Harold's true nature provided small comfort. The battle lines were drawn more clearly than ever. Those who supported my independence versus those who demanded conformity to Harold's vision of success. 3 weeks before Harold's 65th birthday, Mother began her campaign to ensure my attendance. The call started gently, her voice honeyed with false concern. "It would mean so much to your father if you came, Hazel. He's only turning 65 once, and despite everything, you're still his daughter. Can't we put aside these silly disagreements for one evening?" When gentle persuasion failed, she escalated to guilt. "I've already told everyone you'll be there." Imagine the gossip if you don't show up. People will think our family is falling apart. The irony of her statement, as if our family hadn't been broken for years, would have been laughable if it weren't so sad. The country club had been transformed into Harold's vision of success made tangible. Ice sculptures shaped like the Hamilton Enterprises logo dominated each corner, while photographs of his business achievements lined the walls. I noticed there were no family photos, just images of groundbreaking ceremonies and Harold shaking hands with mayors and senators. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's financial elite, 200 people who'd come to pay homage to Harold Hamilton's empire. I arrived an hour into the party, carrying a 3-tiered chocolate raspberry cake that had taken me 2 days to perfect, each layer a work of art that represented everything I'd learned and loved about my craft. As I navigated through clusters of guests, fragments of conversation reached my ears. Harold was holding court near the bar, regaling listeners with news of his latest acquisition. "And that's not all," he boomed, his voice carrying across the room. "We're proud to announce a merger with Preston Medical Group, where my brilliant daughter Claire's husband Bradley is senior partner. It's keeping success in the family, as I always say." Claire stood beside him, radiant in a designer dress that cost more than my monthly rent, her smile perfectly calibrated to show just the right amount of professional pride. Bradley, a man who'd always reminded me of a well-groomed shark, shook hands with potential investors while mentally calculating his expanded net worth. Thomas commanded attention on the other side of the room, surrounded by partners from various law firms. His recent promotion to partner at Whitfield and Associates, mysteriously timed just after Harold had secured them as Hamilton Enterprises' primary legal counsel, was being celebrated with expensive champagne and knowing looks. My brother caught my eye across the room and offered a small, apologetic shrug. We both knew how he'd earned that promotion, but he'd made his choice long ago to play by Harold's rules. His wife Jennifer, pregnant with their first child, clung to his arm and studiously avoided looking in my direction, as if acknowledging me might contaminate her perfect Hamilton wife image. I found a spot at the back of the room to place my cake, the dessert table already groaning under the weight of elaborate confections from the city's most expensive bakery. My creation looked simple by comparison, elegant rather than ostentatious, but I knew the flavors would surpass anything else there. Uncle Robert, Harold's younger brother who'd never worked a day outside the family company, noticed me first. Well, if it isn't the family baker," he sneered, his words slightly slurred from too much whiskey. "Still playing with your easy bake oven, Hazel? You know, there's still time to grow up and join the real world. Your cousin Janet's making 6 figures as your father's executive assistant. But I suppose some people prefer to struggle." Before I could respond, Harold had taken the microphone for his speech. The room fell silent as he began his carefully crafted narrative of success. 65 years on this earth, and I've built something that will last generations, he began, his voice thick with self-satisfaction. From a small property management office to an empire worth hundreds of millions. But a man's greatest achievement isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in legacy, in the children who carry on his work. He paused for dramatic effect, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Thomas and Claire. "I'm proud to say my son Thomas has become one of the city's finest corporate lawyers, handling cases that shape our business landscape. My daughter Claire saves lives every day while her husband Bradley builds the medical facilities of tomorrow." The pause that followed was deliberate, calculated to highlight who he wasn't mentioning. Guests began to shift uncomfortably, some glancing in my direction with expressions ranging from pity to curiosity. Harold continued as if the omission was natural. "Success breeds success. Excellence demands excellence. That's the Hamilton way." He raised his champagne glass, the light catching the crystal and creating tiny rainbows that felt like mockery. "To family, to legacy, to those who understand that ambition isn't just a word, it's a way of life." The room erupted in applause, but I noticed Aunt Martha remained seated, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. As the speech ended and conversations resumed, Harold made his way toward the dessert table. He stopped short when he saw my cake, his eyes narrowing as he recognized my signature chocolate work. "What's this?" he asked loudly enough to draw attention. Don't tell me you actually made this yourself, Hazel. From scratch? The way he said it, dripping with condescension, made it clear this wasn't a compliment. I straightened my spine and met his gaze directly. Every layer, every decoration. It's a chocolate raspberry truffle cake with Swiss meringue buttercream. I thought you deserved something special for your birthday. He laughed, an ugly sound that drew more onlookers. Special? You want to know what would be special? Having 3 successful children instead of 2 and whatever you are. Janet materialized beside him like a vulture sensing carrion, her voice pitched to Carrie. Oh, Hazel's little hobby bakery. I follow it on Instagram. All 4,700 followers must be so impressed. She smirked, knowing full well that her own carefully curated lifestyle account had 10 times that number thanks to Hamilton money and connections. It's so brave of you to keep trying despite, well, everything. Not everyone can handle real success. Some people are just meant for simpler things. The gathered crowd tittered nervously, unsure whether to laugh or look away from the unfolding family drama. I felt heat rising in my cheeks but forced myself to remain calm, remembering Thomas's advice about not giving them the reaction they craved. Harold wasn't finished. Emboldened by the audience and too much champagne, he launched into the tirade he'd clearly been rehearsing. You know what your problem is, Hazel? You never learned the value of ambition. While your siblings were building careers, you were playing with flour and sugar like a child. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is when my colleagues ask about you? Oh, Harold, how's your daughter's little bakery, they say, trying not to laugh. You had every advantage, the best schools, connections that people would kill for, and you threw it all away for what? To make cookies? His voice had risen to near shouting, spittle flying as he gestured wildly. You could have been anything. A doctor like Claire, a lawyer like Thomas, hell, even a respectable accountant would have been better than this embarrassment. But no, you had to be special, had to follow your passion like some millennial cliché. Well, let me tell you something about passion, little girl. Passion doesn't pay bills. Passion doesn't build empires. And passion sure as hell doesn't make you anything more than a disappointment to everyone who wasted time believing in you. He paused, breathing heavily, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. The room had gone completely silent, 200 people holding their collective breath as they witnessed Harold Hamilton destroying his daughter in public. Then came the words that would change everything. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that somehow carried throughout the room. You'll never amount to anything, Hazel. Never. You're a failure, a waste of the Hamilton name, and deep down, you know it. That's why you hide in your little bakery, pretending that making pretty cakes matters. But it doesn't. You don't matter. You're nothing. The words hung in the air like poison, and I felt every eye in the room on me. Some guests looked horrified, others seemed to be savoring the drama, and a few appeared to be recording on their phones. This was it, the moment that would define everything that came after. I looked at my father, this man who'd spent my entire life trying to mold me into his image, and felt something shift inside me. The desperation for his approval that had driven so many of my choices finally crumbled, replaced by a strange sense of freedom. I smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to confuse him, and spoke in a clear, calm voice that carried just as far as his shouting had. Thank you for the motivation, Dad. The simple response clearly wasn't what he'd expected. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the marble floor in a steady rhythm that felt like a countdown to a new beginning. Behind me, I heard the explosion of whispers, Mother's shrill voice demanding to know what I meant, and Harold's continued sputtering. But I didn't stop, didn't turn around, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing any pain. As I pushed through the heavy doors into the cool night air, I left behind more than just a party. I left behind 28 years of seeking approval from someone incapable of giving it, of measuring my worth by someone else's standards, of believing that love had to be earned through achievement. The valet brought my car around, and as I drove away from the country club, I couldn't see the road clearly through my tears, but for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I was going. The morning after the party, my phone buzzed with a schizophrenic mix of messages that perfectly illustrated my family's dysfunction. Some relatives sent tentative texts of support, carefully worded to avoid taking real sides. "That was rough last night. Hope you're okay," from Cousin Bradley. "Your father had too much to drink. You know how he gets," from Uncle Stuart. But most maintained radio silence, their absence speaking louder than any words could. The Hamilton family had drawn its battle lines, and most had chosen the side with deeper pockets. Only Aunt Martha's message showed real spine. "That was magnificent, darling. Your dignity in the face of his cruelty was true strength. Call if you need anything." Mother's campaign began at 7 a.m. sharp with the first of what would become hourly phone calls. Her voicemails evolved throughout the day like a twisted emotional symphony. The morning messages dripped with manufactured concern. "Hazel, sweetheart, I'm worried about you. Leaving like that was so dramatic. People are talking." By noon, she'd shifted to guilt. "Your father is devastated. He didn't sleep at all. His blood pressure is through the roof. Is this what you wanted?" By evening, she'd reached full manipulation mode. "I don't know how much more of this I can take. Dr. Morrison says the stress is affecting my heart. If something happens to me, I hope you can live with yourself." Each message was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, years of practice distilled into voicemail form. Harold's response was more direct and infinitely more vicious. Within 48 hours, I started receiving calls from business associates who'd previously been friendly, all with variations of the same message. "Hazel, I'm sorry, but I won't be able to use your bakery for the corporate events anymore. We're going in a different direction for our catering needs. My wife loves your pastries, but we have to be careful about our business relationships." The subtext was clear. Harold Hamilton was calling in favors and making threats. One honest soul, Mark from the architecture firm down the street, admitted the truth. "Your father holds the lease on our building, Hazel. I can't afford to cross him. I'm sorry." The smear campaign intensified when Harold started spreading poison through his network. At the Rotary Club, he told anyone who'd listen that I was mentally unstable, that my emotional outburst at his party proved I couldn't handle business pressure. He crafted a narrative where he was the concerned father trying to help his troubled daughter, while I was the ungrateful child who'd publicly humiliated him. "I offered her every opportunity," he'd say, his voice thick with false sorrow. "But some people are just determined to fail. It breaks my heart." The story spread through country club lounges and boardrooms, each retelling adding new embellishments about my supposed instability. 3 days after the party, I discovered Harold's reach extended further than I'd imagined. My landlord, Mr. Peterson, appeared at the bakery looking uncomfortable. "Hazel, I've received some concerning information about your business," he began, unable to meet my eyes. It turned out Harold had sent his lawyers to inform Peterson about potential zoning violations, health code issues that didn't exist, and vague threats about property values declining due to undesirable tenants. While Peterson assured me he wasn't going to break the lease, he made it clear that renewal would be complicated unless these concerns were addressed. The message was clear: Harold intended to make my life hell until I surrendered. Janet's social media assault began that same week, a coordinated attack designed to destroy my reputation online. She started by posting edited videos from the party that made me look unhinged, cutting out Harold's cruel words and showing only my smile and exit with captions like, "When family disappointments can't handle truth, toxic drama queen." Her followers, a mixture of Hamilton Enterprises employees and society wannabes, piled on with comments about spoiled brats and ungrateful children. She then created fake accounts to leave negative reviews on my bakery's pages, complaints about finding hair in food, getting food poisoning, and encountering rude service, all posted within hours of each other but dated across several weeks. The local newspaper situation felt like another carefully orchestrated blow. I'd been writing a weekly baking column for the Riverside Gazette for 2 years, sharing recipes and stories about the joy of creating food from scratch. My editor, Susan Chin, called with obvious reluctance in her voice. Hazel, I'm so sorry, but we're restructuring our lifestyle section. Your column has been wonderful, but we're moving in a different direction. When I pressed for details, she admitted that their biggest advertiser, Hamilton Commercial Properties, had expressed concerns about the newspaper's content choices. I fought for you, she said quietly. But I have 20 employees whose jobs depend on that advertising revenue. I'm sorry. The financial squeeze came next, a coordinated assault on my business's cash flow. 3 suppliers simultaneously demanded immediate payment for outstanding invoices that weren't due for another 30 days. My carefully managed budget, already stretched thin from the recent sales decline, couldn't handle the sudden demand. When I called to negotiate, each gave variations of the same story. Their credit departments had reassessed risk and determined my account needed to be current immediately. The fact that all 3 reached this conclusion in the same week wasn't coincidence. Then the bank called about my business credit line, requesting documentation for a routine review that felt anything but routine. Thomas finally broke his silence with a late-night visit to my apartment, looking haggard in a way I'd never seen before. Dad's lost it, Hazel, he said, slumping on my couch with his head in his hands. He's calling in every favor, threatening anyone who does business with you. I tried to talk to him, but he won't listen. He keeps saying you need to learn your lesson, that you'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. He pulled out a folder thick with documents. I've been collecting evidence of what he's doing. Some of it might be illegal, definitely unethical. But Hazel, if you use this, it'll destroy him. And probably the family. Are you prepared for that? Claire's betrayal cut differently than the others. She chose her moment carefully, posting a long Facebook essay about family values and the importance of gratitude. Without naming me directly, she painted a picture of a selfish sibling who'd rejected opportunities others would kill for, who'd chosen personal satisfaction over family loyalty. Some people confuse stubbornness with strength, she wrote. True strength is recognizing when you're wrong and having the humility to make amends. It's not too late for certain people to apologize and return to the family that loves them despite their choices. The post garnered hundreds of reactions, mostly from people who knew exactly who she meant. The medical community she moved in ate up the drama, and I heard whispers that she'd been dining out on the story at hospital fundraisers. Aunt Martha proved to be my lifeline during this storm, arriving at the bakery one morning with reinforcements in the form of her lawyer, David Brennan. I've watched Harold bully people my entire life, she said firmly. But this ends now. David specializes in business interference and defamation. What your father's doing isn't just wrong, it's actionable. As Brennan outlined potential legal remedies, I felt a glimmer of hope. But Martha wasn't finished. I've also called in some favors of my own. The food blogger Miranda Walsh owes me from when I helped launch her career. She's going to do a feature on your bakery that will counter Harold's narrative. And I've got 3 major clients ready to place substantial orders. Your father forgets that I have influence too. The anonymous attack on my online presence reached a crescendo when someone created a website called Sweet Dreams Reality that purported to expose the truth about my bakery. It featured doctored health inspection reports, fake customer complaints, and creative interpretations of financial data that painted my business as failing. The site was sophisticated, clearly created by someone with resources and technical knowledge. When Thomas traced the domain registration, it led back to a shell company connected to Hamilton Enterprises' IT department. This is criminal, Hazel, he said. Defamation, fraud, cyber harassment. Dad's either lost complete touch with reality or he thinks his money makes him untouchable. Either way, this has to stop. As I sat in my empty bakery that night, 3 weeks after the party, surveying the damage to my life and livelihood, I realized something crucial. Harold's escalating attacks weren't the behavior of a man confident in his position. They were the desperate actions of someone who'd expected immediate capitulation and couldn't handle being defied. Every cruel tactic, every burned bridge, every dollar spent on destroying me was an admission that my simple words, "Thank you for the motivation, Dad," had shaken him more than any confrontation could have. He'd expected tears, begging, either immediate submission or explosive anger he could point to as evidence of my instability. Instead, I'd smiled and walked away, and that dignity was driving him insane. The war between us was no longer about my bakery or his vision of success. It had become about something much deeper, the fundamental question of whether a parent's love should come with conditions, and whether a child's worth could be measured in anything other than their own terms. The universe has a strange way of delivering opportunities when you need them most. Whitney Chen from Food Network arrived in town on a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the social media storm began. She wasn't there because of me initially. She was scouting locations for a new show about hidden culinary gems in mid-sized cities. But the taxi driver who brought her from the airport happened to be one of my regular customers, Roberto, whose daughter I'd made a quinceañera cake for last year. "You want hidden gems," he told her. "Let me tell you about sweet dreams and the war between David and Goliath happening right here." By the time they reached her hotel, Whitney had heard enough to rearrange her schedule. She entered my bakery at the slowest time of day, when the morning rush had ended and the afternoon crowd hadn't arrived. I was behind the counter, piping roses onto a wedding cake, trying not to think about how many cancellations I'd received that week. "Are you Hazel?" she asked, and when I confirmed, she smiled. "I'm Whitney Chen from Food Network. I've been hearing the most interesting story about you, something about standing up to a real estate mogul who happens to be your father. Mind if I try some of your work while you tell me about it?" There was something about her genuine interest, the way she savored the lavender honey croissant while listening without judgment, that made me open up completely. The TikTok video happened by accident. One of my younger customers, Mia, had been recording herself trying my new salted caramel macaron when Harold stormed in with 2 lawyers, demanding to speak with me about cease and desist options regarding defamation. I hadn't said a public word about him since the party, but truth had never been his strong suit. As he ranted about ungrateful children and the consequences of biting the hand that feeds you, Mia kept recording. My response, calm and measured while I continued frosting cupcakes, went viral overnight. "Sir, I'm running a business here. If you're not ordering anything, I'll have to ask you to leave." The contrast between his red-faced blustering and my professional composure became the perfect metaphor for our entire conflict. Within 24 hours, the video had 3 million views and climbing. The hashtags bakery drama and toxic dad gets owned trended nationally. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of family rejection, of choosing passion over pressure, of finding success on their own terms. But what really changed everything was when food blogger Miranda Walsh, with her 2 million followers, posted a thread breaking down the situation. She'd done her research, tracking the timeline of Harold's attacks, documenting the fake reviews, and exposing the coordination behind the smear campaign. "This isn't just family drama," she wrote. "This is a powerful man using his influence to destroy his daughter's small business because she refused to obey. If we don't support independent businesses against this kind of bullying, who will?" The next morning, I arrived at the bakery to find a line around the block. Orders poured in from across the country, people wanting to ship my pastries to friends with notes of encouragement. Local customers who disappeared after Harold's threats returned in force, some apologizing for their cowardice, others simply voting with their wallets. The overnight transformation was overwhelming. I had to call in my part-time employees for extra shifts and recruit Aunt Martha to help manage the phone that wouldn't stop ringing. Food Network officially announced they were featuring Sweet Dreams in their upcoming special, and Whitney Chen became a regular fixture, documenting what she called the most authentic David versus Goliath story in American small business. The real shock came when Thomas arrived at the bakery with a banker's box and a grim expression. "I can't do this anymore, Hazel," he said, setting the box on my counter. Inside were documents I'd never imagined seeing, emails between Harold and various city officials discussing pressure points for my business, financial records showing bribes disguised as consulting fees, and most damning, evidence that Harold had been skimming from client trust accounts to fund his campaign against me. "He's been so focused on destroying you that he got sloppy," Thomas explained. His business manager came to me last week, terrified about what she discovered. "This goes beyond our family drama. He's been committing actual crimes. Celebrity chef Marcus Rivera's entrance into my story felt like something from a movie. He'd seen the viral video and recognized something in my calm response to Harold's tirade. "You handle pressure like someone who was born for this business," he told me during our first video call. "I want to mentor you, not because of the drama, but because your techniques are solid and your flavors are exceptional." His endorsement carried weight that no amount of Harold's influence could counter. When he posted about my chocolate raspberry cake being one of the best he'd tasted outside Paris, orders flooded in from food enthusiasts nationwide. Suddenly, Harold's narrative of my failure became laughable in the face of recognition from one of the culinary world's most respected figures. The revelation about Janet came from an unexpected source, her own husband, Daniel. He appeared at my door one evening, looking destroyed. "I need to tell you something about Janet and your father," he began, hands trembling. It turned out Janet's loyalty to Harold went beyond family affection or career advancement. They'd been having an affair for 2 years, a secret that explained her vicious attacks on me and her privileged position in the company. Daniel had discovered emails and hotel receipts, confronted Janet, and learned that Harold had been promising to divorce my mother and marry her once he'd dealt with the Hazel problem. The information was devastating, not just for what it revealed about Harold's character but for how it would destroy my mother's carefully constructed world. Claire's medical practice became collateral damage in Harold's war. Someone, possibly inspired by the online attention to our family drama, began investigating her husband Bradley's billing practices. What they found was a pattern of insurance fraud stretching back years, with Claire's knowledge and participation. Federal investigators arrived at their practice with warrants, seizing computers and records. The medical community that had embraced her Facebook post about family values now distanced themselves from the scandal. Claire called me in tears, begging me to make it stop, as if I had orchestrated the consequences of her own choices. "You've ruined everything," she sobbed. "Our practice, our reputation, our future." The irony that she blamed me for exposure of their own crimes wasn't lost on either of us. Harold's business empire began crumbling faster than anyone anticipated. The investigation Thomas had inadvertently triggered by sharing documents spread beyond the trust account issues. Reporters started digging into Hamilton Enterprises' history, uncovering a pattern of strong-arm tactics, questionable permits, and environmental violations that had been covered up for years. Major clients began pulling out, not wanting to be associated with the growing scandal. The man who'd built his identity on success and power watched his life's work disintegrate in real time. His response was typically Harold. He held a press conference blaming everyone but himself, claiming to be the victim of a vindictive daughter and disloyal employees. The day Mother finally called me directly, her voice was different. Gone was the manipulative sweetness, the guilt-tripping tears. She sounded hollow, aged beyond her years. "I know about Janet," she said simply. "I've known for months. But I also know about Patricia before her, and Susan before that. Your father has always been this way, and I've always looked the other way because the life he provided seemed worth the humiliation." She paused, and I could hear her lighting one of the cigarettes she pretended not to smoke. "You were right to leave, Hazel. Right to refuse his terms. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. It's 40 years too late, but better late than never. Maybe you can teach an old dog new tricks after all." The culmination of everything came when Forbes magazine reached out for an interview. They weren't interested in the family drama, they wanted to feature Sweet Dreams as part of their story on resilient small businesses. During the interview, they revealed that based on recent valuations considering my expanded online presence, celebrity endorsements, and nationwide shipping operation, my little bakery was worth approximately $2 million. The number was staggering, but what mattered more was what it represented. Every dollar was earned honestly, built on genuine quality and authentic connections rather than threats and manipulation. Harold's prediction that I'd never amount to anything had become the greatest miscalculation of his life. As December arrived and the bakery bustled with holiday orders, I stood in my kitchen watching my team of 12 employees, a far cry from the solo operation of 6 months ago. We were shipping nationwide, had a cookbook deal in negotiations, and Food Network was developing a show concept around the bakery. The transformation felt surreal, but every success was sweetened by the knowledge that it had grown from the ashes of Harold's attempts to destroy me. Aunt Martha, now my official business partner, raised her coffee mug in a toast. To proving that the best revenge isn't served cold, she said with a wink. Sometimes it's served warm from the oven with a side of sweet justice. 6 months after Harold's birthday disaster, my life had transformed beyond recognition. Food and Wine magazine's feature on Sweet Dreams hit newsstands with a cover story titled, "The Bakery That Broke the Internet: How Hazel Hamilton Turned Family Rejection into Sweet Success." The accompanying photo shoot captured not just beautiful pastries but the story of resilience behind them. Orders flooded in from around the world, and I was fielding franchise inquiries daily, though I remained committed to quality over quantity. The second location opened in the city's premier shopping district, a gleaming space that bore no resemblance to my humble original shop but maintained the same warmth and authenticity that had built my reputation. The investigation into Harold's business practices had evolved into a federal case that made headlines nationwide. The FBI had uncovered decades of financial crimes, from money laundering to tax evasion, aided by forensic accountants who followed the paper trail Thomas had initially exposed. Hamilton Enterprises, once valued at $300 million, was being systematically dismantled to pay restitution to victims of Harold's schemes. The mighty Harold Hamilton, who'd once controlled half the commercial real estate in our city, was reduced to liquidating personal assets to pay legal fees. The man who'd measured worth in dollars and cents was learning what bankruptcy truly meant. The invitation to the family Christmas party arrived on expensive cardstock, Mother's handwriting still elegant despite everything that had transpired. She'd moved into Aunt Martha's guest house after the divorce filing, finding unexpected friendship with the sister-in-law she'd previously dismissed as eccentric. The party would be at Martha's estate rather than the country club, a symbolic shift in family power dynamics. After much deliberation and discussion with my therapist, I decided to attend. Not for Harold, who I learned would be there despite everything, but for myself. I needed to face them all with the confidence that success and self-respect had given me. I dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing a designer dress I could never have afforded before, paired with the simple pearl necklace grandmother Hamilton had left me, the one family heirloom Harold couldn't claim or control. As I prepared to leave, my phone rang with life-changing news. My literary agent had called to confirm what we'd been negotiating for weeks. A major publisher wanted my cookbook, offering a 6-figure advance and a promotional tour. Additionally, the production company behind several successful Food Network shows was ready to greenlight Sweet Dreams with Hazel, a series combining baking instruction with stories of overcoming adversity. I walked into that family gathering carrying success that couldn't be disputed or diminished. The estate was decorated with understated elegance, Martha's artistic eye evident in every detail. Family members who'd maintained their silence during Harold's attacks now greeted me with enthusiasm that reeked of opportunism. "Hazel, we've been following your success. So proud of you," gushed cousin Bradley, who'd sent exactly one text of support months ago. Others were less subtle in their approaches, mentioning their own business ventures that could use some collaboration with my brand. I smiled politely, offering nothing beyond pleasantries, saving my energy for the confrontations that actually mattered. Harold stood near the fireplace, a shadow of his former imposing self. The months of legal battles had aged him dramatically, his expensive suit hung loose on his diminished frame, and his signature commanding presence had withered into something almost pathetic. When our eyes met across the room, I saw a flicker of the old arrogance before it crumbled into something I'd never seen before, uncertainty. He started toward me, his walk lacking its usual aggressive confidence. Behind him, Janet was notably absent, their affair having ended spectacularly when she realized his promises of wealth and power were as empty as his paternal affection. Claire intercepted me first, her designer facade intact but cracks showing beneath. "Hazel," she began, her voice pitched with false warmth. "I've been meaning to call. Things have been difficult with the practice situation." She couldn't even name her own scandal, dancing around the federal indictment that had ended her medical career. "I was wondering if you might need help with the medical aspects of your cookbook. You know, nutritional analysis, health benefits of ingredients. I have so much free time now. The request was transparent, a desperate grab for relevance and income from someone who'd publicly dismissed my career choices. I looked at my younger sister, brilliant and broken, and felt only pity. Claire, I responded gently but firmly, I've already contracted with a team of nutritionists who specialize in cookbook development. But thank you for thinking of me. The dismissal was polite but final, and she recognized it. Her face crumpled slightly before she recovered, murmuring something about checking on Mother before retreating. Around us, family members pretended not to watch these interactions, but I could feel their attention like static electricity in the air. Everyone wanted to know how the family's former black sheep would handle her triumphant return. Thomas approached next, Jennifer nowhere to be seen. Their marriage hadn't survived the revelation of how he'd gained his partnership, and divorce proceedings were apparently uglier than our parents. Hazel, he said simply, and in that one word, I heard apology, regret, and something like pride. I want you to know that I testified to the FBI. Told them everything I knew about Dad's operations. It probably means I'll never practice law again once the bar review is complete, but it was the right thing to do. He paused, vulnerability replacing his usual calculated demeanor. I'm thinking of maybe going back to school. Counseling or social work. Something that actually helps people instead of protecting corruption. Think someone who enabled a criminal enterprise for years could redeem themselves. Before I could answer Thomas, Harold finally reached us. Up close, his decline was even more apparent. The commanding voice that had boomed across the country club was now reedy and uncertain. Hazel, he began, then stopped, seemingly lost for words. The man who'd never met a silence he couldn't fill with self-aggrandizement now struggled with basic conversation. I wanted to say, he tried again, that is, your mother suggested I should, another pause, his hands gesturing uselessly. Finally, he managed, your business success has been impressive. The words seemed to physically pain him, each syllable an admission that his prophecy of my failure had been spectacularly wrong.
I let the silence stretch, refusing to make this easier for him. When I finally spoke, my voice carried the authority that came from genuine achievement. Thank you, Harold. Though I should clarify, it's not just business success. The cookbook deal includes a documentary component about family dynamics and entrepreneurship. The TV show will feature stories from other people who've overcome familial opposition to follow their dreams. And the foundation I'm establishing will provide grants to young entrepreneurs whose families don't support their ventures. Each announcement landed like a blow, evidence that my success had transcended anything his narrow definition could encompass. The room had gone quiet, everyone openly watching now. Harold's face cycled through emotions, landing on something that might have been regret. Hazel, I need to ask you something, he said, voice dropping. The federal case, they're seizing everything. The house, the cars, even your mother's jewelry, though she's not implicated. Is there any chance you could, that is, would you consider helping? Alone, perhaps? Or maybe you could speak to the prosecutors, tell them I'm not the monster they're painting me as? The request was so audacious, so typically Harold even in defeat, that several family members gasped audibly. He was actually asking me to save him from the consequences of his own actions, using money my little bakery had earned despite his sabotage. I smiled, the same calm smile I'd given him at his birthday party. Harold, I learned so much from you. You taught me that success comes from hard work and taking responsibility for our choices. You showed me that actions have consequences and that nobody owes us anything we haven't earned. I'm grateful for those lessons. I paused, letting him hope for a moment. Which is why I won't interfere with the justice system doing its job. You created this situation, and I have faith in your ability to handle the consequences. After all, a Hamilton never makes excuses, right? The words were his own, thrown back at him from countless lectures about personal responsibility he'd given while building his empire on threats and corruption. Mother appeared then, looking healthier than she had in years. The divorce had freed something in her, and she'd enrolled in art classes, started therapy, and begun the process of discovering who Diane was beyond Mrs. Harold Hamilton. "That's enough, Harold," she said firmly. "You've said your piece. Leave Hazel alone." She turned to me, real pride in her eyes for perhaps the first time. "Darling, I heard about the cookbook. Will you include your grandmother's recipes? The ones I should have taught you but was too busy playing perfect wife to share?" The olive branch was unexpected but genuine, and I found myself nodding. Maybe some relationships could be salvaged from the wreckage. As the evening progressed, I found myself holding court, family members approaching to hear about the business, the book, the show. But I noticed Harold standing alone by the window, champagne untouched, watching the success he'd tried to prevent flourish before his eyes. Janet had abandoned him when the money ran out, his business was destroyed, his reputation in ruins. Everything he'd valued was gone, while everything he'd dismissed, my hobby, my playing with flour, had built an empire of its own. The poetry of it wasn't lost on anyone present. When I caught him wiping away what might have been tears, I felt a complex mix of vindication and sorrow. This broken man had once been my father, before ambition and cruelty had consumed whatever capacity for love he might have possessed. The party ended with Thomas and me standing on Martha's terrace, looking out at the city lights. "You know what's funny?" he said quietly. "Dad spent our whole lives telling us that success meant crushing the competition, that power came from making others feel small. But look at you. You built something amazing by lifting others up, by creating joy instead of fear. Every wedding cake you make, every birthday celebration, every batch of cookies for a school fundraiser, you're adding happiness to the world. Dad extracted value, you create it." He paused, then added, "I'm proud to be your brother, Hazel. And I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." As I drove home that night, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, Harold had stood in front of society's elite and declared I would never amount to anything. Now, my net worth exceeded what his had been before the investigation. But more importantly, I'd found something he never had, genuine respect earned through integrity, success built on passion rather than fear, and the knowledge that true achievement meant more than numbers in a bank account. His cruelty had been the catalyst for my growth, his rejection the push I needed to stop seeking validation from someone incapable of giving it. In trying to destroy me, Harold Hamilton had created his greatest success story, even if he was too broken to appreciate the irony. The healing journey began in earnest after that Christmas gathering. I'd spent years in survival mode, fighting Harold's attacks and building my business simultaneously, never truly processing the emotional toll of a lifetime of rejection. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Winters, specialized in family trauma and entrepreneurship, a combination that perfectly addressed my unique situation. "Success doesn't erase wounds," she told me during one pivotal session. "It just gives you better resources to heal them." Through twice-weekly sessions, I began untangling the web of perfectionism, people-pleasing, and desperate need for validation that Harold's treatment had woven into my personality. EMDR therapy helped process specific traumatic memories, like the day he'd thrown my first baking trophy in the trash, declaring it participation prize garbage. Meditation became my morning anchor, replacing the anxiety-driven early morning panic that had fueled my initial business years. I'd sit in my bakery before dawn, not frantically preparing for the day but simply breathing, existing in the space I'd created despite everything. The practice revealed how much of my drive had been powered by proving Harold wrong rather than building something for myself. As that toxic motivation dissolved, it was replaced by genuine joy in creation, in serving my community, in mentoring my employees. The success that followed felt different, cleaner somehow, untainted by the need for revenge or validation. Building my chosen family became as important as growing my business. My employees weren't just staff, they became the siblings who celebrated my victories without jealousy, the parental figures who offered advice without conditions. Elena, my head baker, had escaped her own toxic family situation, and together we created a workplace culture that was the antithesis of Hamilton Enterprises, supportive, collaborative, based on mutual respect rather than fear. Regular customer Mrs. Chen became the grandmother figure I'd never had, sharing wisdom over afternoon tea and red bean pastries. The community that formed around Sweet Dreams provided the unconditional support my biological family never could. My relationship with Thomas deepened in ways neither of us had anticipated. Free from Harold's influence and manipulation, we discovered we actually liked each other. He started visiting the bakery regularly, not as the Hamilton heir slumming it at his sister's shop, but as a brother genuinely interested in my life. Our Thursday evening drinks became a tradition, where we'd process our shared trauma and plan our futures. His journey into counseling proved as transformative as my entrepreneurial success. "We're both rebuilding," he said one evening. "Just with different tools." His choice to testify against Harold had cost him his legal career but given him something more valuable: integrity and peace of mind. Aunt Martha evolved from supportive relative to true mentor and mother figure. Our business partnership flourished beyond mere investment. She brought artistic vision and decades of experience standing up to Hamilton manipulation. Together, we launched the Sweet Dreams Foundation, providing microloans and mentorship to aspiring entrepreneurs from difficult family backgrounds. "Every Harold creates a dozen Hazels," Martha observed during one board meeting. "Our job is to help them bloom despite the frost." Her estate became my second home, a place where creativity was celebrated and success wasn't measured solely in profit margins. Under her guidance, I learned to see my achievements not as rebellion against Harold but as fulfillment of my own potential. The cookbook, Rising: Recipes and Resilience from Sweet Dreams Bakery, became a bestseller beyond anyone's expectations. But more meaningful were the messages from readers who found inspiration beyond the recipes. A young man in Ohio wrote about using my story to finally pursue his passion for woodworking despite his family's disapproval. A woman in Texas shared how my chapter on processing rejection helped her leave an abusive marriage. The book tour became less about promoting sales and more about creating spaces for people to share their own stories of overcoming family trauma. Each signing ended with tears, hugs, and connections that transcended the typical author-reader relationship. The television show exceeded even Food Network's optimistic projections. Sweet Dreams with Hazel resonated because it wasn't just about baking, it was about building a life of authenticity despite opposition. Each episode featured not just recipes but stories of resilience, interviews with others who'd chosen passion over family pressure. The episode where Thomas appeared as a guest, discussing his journey from corrupt lawyer to counseling student, became the season's highest rated. But the most powerful moment came when Mother agreed to appear, publicly acknowledging her role in enabling Harold's abuse and her commitment to breaking generational patterns. Her honesty and vulnerability transformed public perception and began her own journey toward redemption. Speaking at business conferences initially terrified me, but I discovered a gift for connecting with audiences through radical honesty. Instead of presenting a polished success story, I shared the messy truth. The nights crying in my bakery's bathroom, the moment I nearly gave up when Harold's attacks peaked, the ongoing work of healing and growth. My signature talk, The Gift of Rejection: How Being Disowned Saved My Life, regularly received standing ovations. Corporate audiences, initially expecting a feel-good entrepreneurship story, found themselves confronting their own family dynamics and definitions of success. The speaking fees, often more than my bakery's monthly revenue, went directly into the foundation. Harold's complete downfall played out publicly over the year. The federal trial revealed corruption deeper than even Thomas had known, involving judges, city officials, and business leaders across the state. His conviction on multiple counts brought a sentence of 15 to 20 years, though his age and deteriorating health meant he'd likely die in prison. I attended one day of the trial, needing to see him held accountable, but found no joy in his destruction. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for the waste of it all, for the man who'd had everything and lost it pursuing power over people who would have loved him freely if he'd let them. His final statement to the court, blaming everyone but himself, showed he'd learned nothing. The scholarship fund I established specifically targeted culinary students from backgrounds like mine. Those whose families didn't support their dreams, who were financing their education alone, who needed not just money but mentorship and emotional support. The first recipient, Maria Santos, reminded me of myself at that age, talented, determined, but carrying the weight of family disapproval. Mentoring her and the scholars who followed became one of my greatest joys. Watching them graduate, launch their own businesses, and break cycles of family dysfunction provided a sense of purpose that no amount of personal success could match. Each success story felt like another link in a chain of healing that extended far beyond my own journey. 6 months into Harold's incarceration, I received a letter forwarded through his lawyer. His handwriting, once bold and commanding, now looked shaky and uncertain. The pages contained what might have been an apology if Harold had been capable of genuine remorse. Instead, it was filled with self-pity, blame-shifting, and requests for commissary money. I read it once, then filed it away without responding. The man who'd consumed so much of my emotional energy no longer warranted it. My therapist called it profound progress. I'd moved from needing his approval to fighting his disapproval to complete indifference. The opposite of love wasn't hate, it was the peaceful absence of giving a damn. Mother's transformation continued to surprise everyone, including herself. She'd taken to therapy with enthusiasm, confronting decades of internalized misogyny and codependence. Her art had evolved from tentative sketches to bold paintings that explored themes of imprisonment and freedom. When the local gallery offered her a showing, she titled it after the cage, "A Woman at 60 Finds Her Wings." Several pieces sold to collectors who knew nothing of the Hamilton scandal, validating her talent independent of our family drama. Our relationship, while never achieving the mother-daughter closeness I'd craved as a child, developed into a genuine friendship between two women who'd survived the same storm differently. Thomas's graduation from his counseling program coincided with my bakery empire reaching a valuation of $12 million. We celebrated together at the original Sweet Dreams location, just the two of us in the space where everything had started. You know what's ironic? He mused, raising his beer bottle in a toast. Dad always said he was teaching us to be successful. In a twisted way, he did. You learned that his version of success was toxic, so you built something beautiful instead. I learned that enabling corruption corroded the soul, so I'm dedicating my life to healing. We're both successful beyond anything he imagined, we just measure it differently. We drank to that, to redemption, to futures unlimited by the past. The final revelation came during a session with Dr. Winters where we explored generational patterns. Harold's father, my grandfather I'd never met, had been a brutal man who'd measured worth in wealth and beaten his children for showing weakness. Harold had internalized that cruelty, refined it from physical to emotional violence, and perpetuated the cycle. But you broke it, Dr. Winters observed. You took that pain and alchemized it into something healing. Your bakery feeds people, your foundation enables dreams, your story inspires courage. That's the ultimate victory, not your bank balance but your transformation of poison into medicine. Understanding Harold as a victim who became a perpetrator didn't excuse his actions but freed me from taking them personally. My life at 30 had become everything Harold said it wouldn't be and nothing he would recognize as success. Sweet Dreams operated 4 locations with plans for careful expansion. The cookbook had spawned a series, with the second focused on recipes for healing and community building. The TV show's 3rd season featured more diverse stories of family rejection and personal triumph. The foundation had supported 43 entrepreneurs and counting. But more than any metric, I'd found peace. I woke each morning excited about the day, went to bed grateful for the life I'd built. Love came into my life naturally, without the desperation that had marked my relationship with Derek. James, a pediatric nurse who volunteered at the foundation, understood broken families and chosen ones. Our relationship felt like coming home to a place I'd never been but always belonged. The letter I finally wrote to Harold wasn't sent to prison but burned ceremonially at Martha's house with Thomas and Mother as witnesses. In it, I thanked him for the motivation his cruelty had provided, for showing me exactly who I didn't want to become, for creating the conditions that forced me to discover my own strength. I acknowledged the pain he'd caused while refusing to let it define me anymore. Most importantly, I released him, the ghost of his judgment that had haunted even my successes. As the pages turned to ash, I felt the last chains of needing his validation dissolve. Hazel Hamilton was complete, not because Harold finally approved but because his approval had become irrelevant. My story ends where it began, in a bakery filled with the smell of fresh bread and possibility. But now, instead of a desperate woman trying to prove her worth, I stand as someone who defined worth on her own terms. The girl who'd been told she'd never amount to anything had built an empire of sweetness in a world that often tasted bitter. Every wedding cake celebrated love Harold couldn't understand, every birthday party honored joy he couldn't feel, every batch of cookies shared community he'd never experienced. His prophecy of failure had become the catalyst for success beyond his imagination. But the truest success wasn't in the millions earned or accolades received, it was in the simple fact that I'd learned to love the person I'd become, not despite his rejection but because it had forced me to choose myself. The lesson I carry forward and share with every person struggling with family rejection is this: sometimes the greatest gift toxic people give us is their absence. Harold's cruelty taught me kindness through contrast. His conditional love showed me the beauty of acceptance. His narrow definition of success pushed me to discover that achievement means different things to different people, and the only definition that matters is your own. We cannot choose our biological families, but we can choose our response to their dysfunction. We can perpetuate cycles or break them. We can let rejection define us or refine us. I chose refinement, and in that choice, found freedom. To those still trapped in the shadow of someone else's expectations, know this: your worth is not determined by anyone's approval, not even a parent's. Your dreams are valid even if they don't understand them. Your success might look different from their definition, and that's not just okay, it's beautiful. The world needs your unique contribution, not another copy of someone else's vision. Be brave enough to disappoint people who would never be satisfied anyway. Be bold enough to choose joy over approval. Be wise enough to recognize that sometimes, the family we choose is more real than the one we're born into. And always, always remember that the best revenge against those who said you'd never amount to anything is to amount to yourself, fully and unapologetically. What questions does my story raise for you? Are you struggling with family expectations that don't align with your dreams? Have you found the courage to choose your own path despite opposition? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, where we share more stories of triumph over family trauma. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their dreams matter more than others' approval. Thank you for joining me on this journey from rejection to redemption, from a father's cruelty to a daughter's courage. Remember, you are enough, exactly as you are, pursuing exactly what lights your soul on fire. Until next time, this is Hazel from Sweet Dreams, reminding you that the sweetest success is the life you build on your own terms.